You know, our gospel lesson this morning is kind of a strange one, isn't it? A group of Pharisees, they warned Jesus. They warned Jesus that King Herod wants to kill him. You know, why would Pharisees, who were usually Jesus' enemies, why would they warn him that Herod wants to kill him? You know, maybe they were trying to scare Jesus. Maybe they thought that he would go into hiding if he thought that his life was at stake. After all, Herod had only recently murdered John the Baptist, hadn't he? But it was also possible that these Pharisees were issuing a genuine warning. Maybe they didn't want Herod to kill Jesus. You know, not all Pharisees were Jesus' enemies. Remember that Joseph of Arimathea, he took responsibility for Jesus after his death, didn't he? He was a member of the Sanhedrin, and he was probably a Pharisee as well. In any event, the warning failed to frighten Jesus. He didn't run. He didn't go into hiding. Instead, he said, "Go tell that fox, I will keep on driving out demons and healing people today and tomorrow. And on the third day, I will reach my goal. In any case, I must press on today and tomorrow and the next day. For surely no prophet can die outside of Jerusalem." That's a difficult scripture to understand. So let me give you a little background, okay? Jesus, he's on his way to Jerusalem, the place where he will die. He knows that he's going to die there. But it doesn't let him stop. But he doesn't let that stop him, does he? He is on a godly mission to save the world. And he intends to do just that, whatever the cost. So when the Pharisees warned Jesus that Herod is planning to kill him, that doesn't stop him. Jesus is going where God has sent him and will not waver from that. He will die when God chooses, not when Herod chooses. His life is in God's hand, and his death as well. In the scripture verses that I just read, Jesus said, "On the third day I will reach my goal." You know, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to understand what that means, do you? He is talking about his resurrection. That's important. Because Jesus knows that he will die, but he also knows that he will conquer death. And when he conquers death for himself, he will conquer death for us as well. That's what he came to do, isn't it? So the Pharisees, they warned Jesus that Herod wants to kill him. And Jesus, in effect, he says, "Thanks, everybody, but I'm not going to die until my time comes. And that won't happen until I arrive in Jerusalem. Furthermore, my death won't be the end, because on the third day, I will finish my work. I will rise from the dead, and I will conquer death." Now, one of the commentaries that I read as I was putting this together, it starts its treatment of this text by talking about the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King 51 years ago, coming up on 51 years. That isn't what I really expected when I was looking at commentaries about this text, because most of the commentaries, they just explain the Bible verse by verse, you know. And I almost set aside that commentary to find one more focused on the text. But then I realized how close the parallels are between the story of Jesus as found in our text and the story of Martin Luther King's last couple days. Now, on April 3rd, 1968, Dr. King preached at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee. He spoke of an incident that took place in New York City 10 years earlier. He had been signing books when a deranged woman stabbed him. Does anybody remember this? The blade came close to puncturing his aorta, which would have killed him. Dr. King, he talked about other threats to his life. And then he talked about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And when the priest and this is when the priest and the Levites saw the wounded man laying along the side of the road. They, the priest and the Levites, they asked themselves, "If I stop to help this man, what's going to happen to me?" But the Samaritan came along and he asked a different question. He asked, "If I don't stop to help this man, what will happen to him?" King went on to acknowledge the threats against his life, but he said that they didn't matter. Now, at this point in my sermon, I thought I would try to do as eloquently as I could a little Dr. Martin Luther King rendition of that speech. But I decided that it would be better if we just heard it from him himself.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. Like everybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
You know, after that speech, Dr. King went back to his hotel room, and the next afternoon, as he was standing on the balcony outside the door, somebody shot and killed him. Didn't they? But he had come, and he had done what he had come to do, didn't he? But there was work left to do, and others would do it. Dr. King had set the nation on the right path. That's what he had been called to do. That was the call from which he refused to turn back. Now, reading that, I reflected on the many people who put their lives on the line in the course of their work. Police officers, soldiers, firemen. We honor people like that, don't we? Because they have risked their lives to save lives, or to try to make this a better world. And while preparing this sermon, I came across a book by Vasily Grossman, a journalist with the Soviet Army during World War II. Grossman, he was of the Jewish faith. And when he learned that the Germans had invaded the Soviet Union, he urged his mother to flee from Berdichev, her hometown in the Ukraine. However, his mother refused to leave, saying that she couldn't abandon her niece. Now, the German army, they quickly overtook the town, and Grossman's mother died there. Grossman never forgave himself for failing to persuade her to leave. So the question arises, should Grossman's mother have fled? Assuming that she could not persuade her niece to leave with her, should she just abandoned her niece and saved her own life? Did she die for nothing? Ponder that for a while. Which leads me to ask whether Martin Luther King should have been just satisfied with preaching just ordinary sermons in a safe pulpit in some Southern Baptist church. Or whether Jesus would have been better off just remaining in Nazareth than working as a carpenter. Our Christian faith teaches us that life is sacred, and that we have a duty to protect life, including our own lives. But our faith also teaches that the preservation of our own lives is not the highest value. The highest value is loving God, and the second highest is loving our neighbor. That suggests to me that Jesus, traveling on the road to Jerusalem, was exactly where he should have been. You know, he could have saved his own life, but he should not have done so. He did what the Father had sent him to do. We desperately needed him to do that, didn't we? And Martin Luther King, supporting the sanitation workers in Memphis, he was exactly where he should have been. And Vasily Grossman's mother, taking care of her niece, she was exactly where she should have been. Where are we supposed to be? It's unlikely that we, sitting here today will ever have to choose between life and death. That anyone will ever say to us, denounce Christ or die. But if we are ever faced with that choice, I hope that each one of us will die singing a hymn to the glory of God. However, we will all find ourselves faced with smaller choices. Living faithfully or living comfortably. Living honestly or living alive. Taking care of number one or helping our neighbors. Living godly lives or living a life full of compromises. Those are the kind of choices that we actually face every day. And when those choices come, and you will almost certainly face those kind of choices sometime within the next week, I pray that you will make the faithful, godly choice. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.